Hi guys, we'll be waiting for 5 minutes for people to join, so please be patient with us. All right. Hi guys, am I audible? So, a very warm welcome to the session. I am Viruj Thakur. So, a little about myself. I am a third year student in Dr. Akhilesh Das Gupta Institute of Technology and Management, and I have interest in native Android app development. I have been an intern in Ernst Young India for this summer. So yeah, I have very keen interest in building Android apps, and today we are going to walk you through the navigation component or the Jetpack navigation component with the help of Compose. All right, so let's begin. So first, to understand the navigation component, you need to be familiar with a few terms. All right, so let's walk through those terms first, and then we'll start coding the app, which will let you know how to apply those concepts that you learn in the theory part right now. All right, so just give me a minute to write on my screen. All right. So we're talking about the navigation component. All right. So first, I would urge you all to open any arbitrary app on your device and let me know in the comment section what app you all have opened. All right. So let me know that first. You can open any app on your device. Come on, guys, keep responding so that I'll know that you are active in the session. All right, so some say Flipkart, a lot of Flipkart plans, okay. Another says YouTube, one says Instagram. Right, right, cool, cool. Okay, I see you guys are very active today. That's great, that's great. All right, so in your app, can you see any navigation panel which helps you navigate to different screens? Or are you able to see different screens in your app? Are you able to, Kamlesh, we'll get to your doubts later. First, we'll learn about the navigation component and then I'll make sure that your doubts are cleared. Okay. All right. So coming back to the app, you can see many different screens on your Android application, right? So the thing we are going to learn today is how to implement such a feature in our apps so that we can have multiple screens in our app and can extend our app's functionality in a variety of ways. We don't want our content to be cluttered in just one place and all our functionality to reside only in one single place. Instead, we would be, after this session, we would be able to make multiple screens in our app and we would be able to navigate to and fro from the screens. So starting, we are starting with some concepts. The first concept that comes in the navigation component is the term destination. Now, you might say that the term destination is a very simple term to understand because it is a place that we reach or a place that we come from. Anything, it can be defined as such. So, here in the navigation component, a destination is nothing but our app screen. All right, it is our app's screen. So, we can have multiple destinations in our app. So, suppose this is first destination. This is the second destination, and this is the third destination, and so on. We can have multiple destinations in our app, right? So the place or the screen that we have in our app is a destination, right? So that's clear. Now the next term that we come to is the nav host. So nav host. So for me, how I understand nav host is by the term host. So it is very analogous to how a host invites multiple guests to his or her household. So what a nav host is responsible for is a nav host is responsible to display the different screens at different times. Depending on what screen we want to show, we'll learn how we want to show different screens in our app. But the nav host is responsible to display whichever screen we want to show in our app. So you can think of it as a container. So it's a container that is responsible to show different screens in our app. So if I want to show my first screen in the app, my nav host would show the first screen in the app, right? Then if I want to show the second screen, so I say that no, now not I don't want to show the first screen now, I want to show the second screen. I'll tell my nav host to show the second screen. So the nav host is the container which shows the current screen of our app. All right. Now we need to understand the third term, which is routes. Again, routes, you might say it is very self-explanatory that you can navigate through different routes. Obviously, you might have heard of routes and navigation. But what routes mean here in Android is that routes correspond to navigation actions. All right, navigation actions. So when you want your nav host to display a certain type of screen, you will tell the nav controller to go to this route. It might not be getting very clear at this moment because the code is not right here as of now, but later it would get very clear. But for now, you can think of it as this use case in your life. So in olden times, like we used to have remotes where we used to enter a number or a channel number. So we used to have. Wait a second. So we used to have a remote on our cable TVs where we input a number and we navigate to that channel when we put that number in the remote, right? So the number here corresponds to the route. So when we tell a nav controller to go to a certain route, our nav controller would help us to navigate to that route, and the nav host would show the corresponding screen to that route. All right. So the TV button analogy fits here because when we put the channel number through the remote, we are able to see the channel on our TV, right? So you can imagine this in this way. So routes, those are routes which we use to navigate to different screens, and we pass different routes to the nav controller. And lastly, we need to understand what is nav controller. I've been talking about nav controller here a lot. So nav controller. So controller is nothing but the remote of the TV, right? The remote is instructing our TV to go to this channel when we put in some number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Like go to the 123rd channel. So the nav controller, when we pass in a specific route to the nav controller, we are able to go to that channel. So if I pass a nav controller with some certain route. Although this is a very vague code, this is not the actual code, but if I pass the nav controller to navigate to some route, our nav controller would help us to navigate to that route to reach that destination or the screen in our app. So we are now familiar with destinations, we are now familiar with nav host, we are familiar with routes, and we are familiar with the nav controller. There's one more term that is very important here, which is the nav graph. Nav graph. So nav graph can be well understood by the fact that it is the relationship between our different screens. So we also have people who have been doing Android development in the past here in the session as well. So they might they might know about the nav graph where we had XML UI and where we could define our nav graph very visually, where we had different screens. like screen 1. So our nav graph consisted of different screens, and we defined actions to navigate to these screens. So one, and suppose this is an action which gets you to the third screen from the first screen. So we had a visual representation there in that XML, but now we have to build the nav graph using Compose. So we'll write the code for it after adding the nav host composable to our app. So that would be more clear once we enter into the app. So, but for now, you should be aware of these terms, and these terms uh, should not feel unfamiliar to you, because we are going to use these terms repeatedly from now on. So, if you have any doubts till now, you can just write in the chat box and let me know. Other terms: nav host, destinations, routes, nav controller, clear. All right. Asta, I'll explain the last one again. So the nav graph is nothing but the relationship between our screens. So if it is a complete graph which tells us what happens when what happens when I navigate from first screen to the second, or how I navigate from the first screen to the second, or how I navigate from the first screen to the third. So it is nothing but the relationship between all the screens. So a graphical representation of these actions and destinations and routes is nothing but the nav graph. So is it clear now? It is a graphical representation of what we are going to have in our app, the logic behind the navigation in our app. So it is the graphical representation of that thing. Route. All right, crazy and timer. So route. Route is nothing but route is nothing but which corresponds to the navigation action. Like, suppose I have a remote. Like, I am using this in analogies to get things more simplified. So suppose I have a remote, all right, and I enter the channel 1 2 in the remote. Now my TV would show the channel 1 2 as soon as I enter the channel 1 2, which means that I am telling the TV to go to channel 12 because I want to see channel 12, right? So how would the TV know that it has to show channel 12? It will only know once it reads the number 12, and then it would show the channel 12, right? So channel 12 or the number 12 is the route. Are you getting me? So for here, the remote is the nav controller. So if I pass the route to the nav controller, I would be able to navigate to that screen which is represented by the route. In this case, channel 12 and the TV screen that shows at channel 12. Nav host, in respect of the TV remote, uh, I am relating it to the complete setup. So the nav host would be the TV screen in which every screen of the app gets displayed. So nav host is the TV screen. All right. So I think we are very clear with the concept. Uh, I guess so. So before I move ahead to the coding part, I should let you know that for the coding part, you require certain Kotlin fundamentals, and we have covered those in our previous sessions. Uh, all the Kotlin fundamentals and the basic composables such as the row, the column, the image, and the text. So we have covered all those in the previous sessions. So if any of you guys haven't watched those previous sessions, then you can refer to those sessions first to get a clear understanding of what we'll do in the coding part. And it's okay if you haven't. I'll guide you with the best of my knowledge. So don't worry about it. But just after the session, you make sure that you watch those videos as well. All right. So the Kotlin fundamentals and the basic composables such as the row composable, the column composable, the text and the images. Please do watch that if you haven't already. All right. So shall we move on to the coding part? Are you guys excited about the code and what app we'll make today? Come on, you guys must be excited about the app we're making today. Oh, okay. All right. So let's start. Let's fire up our Android Studio. I'd explain you the logic behind the complete app, so you can you can make it yourself. I think you would be able to, since you have attended the previous sessions as well. I think you would be able to make this app. So that would be great if you participate. All right, I am getting a good response from the chat box. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. So all right, let's start with the app. So I'll show you the app first. So is the emulator visible? I think it is. So like this is the app. This is the very basic app that we are going to make today. So this app has four screens, like first screen, second screen, third screen, and the fourth screen. All right. So you can navigate between these screens using the next button, and when you put the cancel button, you can get back to the first screen. So a cancel button is nothing but the home button. So if you press cancel button at the third screen, you'd get back to the first screen. So this the screens in also show a text and an image which you can customize by importing the drawables yourself. So I think you can do that. So that you can edit the text, you can edit the image, you can add your different styles to the buttons. But for now, we are going to have two buttons, next and cancel, which next would lead us to the new screen, and the cancel button would get us back to the home screen. All right. So first things first, my question to you guys: whenever we create a new project, what do we do first? Please answer in the chat box whenever. When we open a new project in our Android Studio, what's the first thing that we do? Some say syntax, some say yes, some say design, some say research, algorithm, logic, and syntax, select empty activity. Mr. Om, I think we have discussed the working of Android Studio in our previous session. So if you have any problem with that, you can refer to that session after this session, all right? But as long as you are having any doubts, I am sure that I will be clearing along the code. All right. So as we'll move further with the code, and along with that, I'll clear all your doubts if you have any. All right. Okay. So homework, new folder, research. All right. Okay. To be very factual about it, like okay, you select the empty activity. That's okay. But for me, it is that I will check my Gradle and add all the dependencies for whatever component I want to use. So that's the first thing I would do. So if I want to use some certain component, so I would add its Gradle dependency. So that's the first thing I would do, and then sync the Gradle. So let's do that. Today we are going to use the navigation component, and we want to have its Gradle dependency, right? So we'll go to our Gradle file. Alright, so this is the Gradle file. So this implementation right here, Android x.navigation navigation compose 2.4.2 is the dependency required for you to use the navigation component in your app. Alright, so if you want to code along, I'd not suggest you code along with me. Just understand the concept here, and then later on replicate the code yourself after we finish with the session. Alright, so this is the first thing we do. That is the add the navigation dependency in our app. All right. Now we simplify our the UI in every screen. Now since every screen has a very similar UI, that is, you can see you can have you have the text, then you have the image, and then you have two buttons. We can use the same composable function to render for every screen. To render every screen, we can use the same composable function by passing it different arguments, because the layout of every screen is very similar. However, in your case, if you want to build your own apps, the layout of your screens might not be similar at all. So what you need to do is you need to define different composable functions to render different screens of your app. All right. So for in this case, every screen of our app contains a text, contains an image, and contains two buttons. So we are going to define the composable lemon text and image with buttons, which can be seen right over here. Let me just put it on the side. So this is the first composable, lemon text and image with buttons. Also, the naming convention of the composables is that you name your composables that in a way that they represent nouns and not verbs. All right. So lemon text and image with buttons. All right. So it takes in a text resource ID, a drawable resource ID. Now, you might be following with the previous sessions. A text resource ID would represent the ID of a text composable, and a drawable resource ID would be the image, right? And the content description resource ID would be the description about the image, which is used for which is used for the talkback feature, or improving the accessibility of our app, right? So for the buttons, we are passing these functions on cancel button clicked and on next button clicked, which represent what will happen when we click the cancel button in a screen, and and the next button click represents what will happen if we click the next button on our screen. So quite self-explanatory. Along with that, I'm passing in two more parameters, is first screen and is last screen, to gray out buttons whenever we can't have that certain navigation action present in our screen. So if we are on the first screen, we won't be able to navigate to home because we're already at home. So to represent that, I have passed in two parameters, is first screen and is last screen. Is first screen to represent whether it's the first screen or not, and is last screen to represent whether it's the last screen or not. Now, you might argue that there might be better ways to do this, but for the sake of simplicity, we are doing it this way right now. And the last parameter to this composable is the modifier, which is an optional parameter that takes in a default value of the of the modifier with a capital M. So if you don't pass it any modifier, it will automatically take in the value that is given to it by default. Alright, so do note that it is a very good practice to pass in modifiers to your composables, because when people start to adopt your composables in their apps, then they would need to set up its attributes and everything and set up its design according to their app. So it is a good practice to always pass in a modifier to your composable and give it a default value of a modifier in case the user does not pass in the modifier when it's using your composable. So the lemon text and image with buttons starts with a column composable, which is aligned in the center horizontally, and the vertical alignment is also set to the center value. And modifier.fillMaxSize makes sure that the column scales to the complete screen. So as you can see in the app as well as in the preview, the column is taking the complete screen. Otherwise, if I remove this parameter, then the column would just take half a part of a screen. All right. Just a second. I'm reading the chat. Alright, are we clear now as to the parameters of this composable? The lemon text and image with buttons. Why are we passing these parameters? And we have covered the column composable. So, guys, please be with me. It's all right. Good, good. All right. So moving on, this now what this column composable takes is a text composable with a spacer and an image. Now, text composable and image composable are something that we are already familiar with, where a text composable displays a string resource as text, and the image composable takes a painter's resource and displays that image on the screen. And we are using the modifier, the default modifier, to scale the image and make it have a border of stroke 2 dp and a certain color as well. ठीक है? And we are giving it a shape as a rounded corner shape, so that the border of the image looks elegant, and with a padding of 16 dp, so that the image and the text don't stick to each other, like they're not next to each other in the column. Instead, the image is padded by 16 dp from the border as well. So we are also having the spacer between the text and the image, so that the image and the text don't stick with each other, and our app looks more clean, right? Now we have a row, because we want the buttons horizontally next to each other. We will use a row composable, and obviously we'd modify it, giving it attributes too, so that it looks clean, by giving it padding, by giving it horizontal arrangement, right? So the two buttons are the two buttons are different in their appearances. The first button is the outline button, which shows like this, which has a white background and with the text of the accent color, and the other is the regular button composable, which has a colored background with white text, right? So the outline button and the button. So the outline button represents the button for cancellation. So for now, on click the on click parameter of the outline button calls the on cancelled button click function, which is passed to the attributes of this composable. Okay, so um, this might be getting tricky. I'll explain it again. Just wait. Right. So this might be getting tricky. So remember that we passed on cancel button clicked function and the on next button click function to our composable, so that we can implement the functionality of the cancel and the next buttons. Is that uh, is that clear till now? Okay. These are the functionalities of the cancel and the next button. So now when we are clicking the button, like on click parameter of the outline button, we want this functionality to get executed on cancel button clicked. And similarly, when we are clicking the next button, we want on next button clicked functionality to get executed. You need not worry about those functionalities as of now, because uh, we are not we are not uh, we are not previewing the composable right now, and we are not completely calling the composable in the app screen. But for now, to understand what these functions stand for, you need to understand that these are functions that would get executed when buttons corresponding to them would get clicked. All right. And similarly, you can enable these buttons using the enabled parameter. Right, you see right here enabled and the enabled parameter right here as well. So you can enable or disable those buttons, whether it's the first screen or whether it's the whenever it is the last screen. You don't want the next button to be visible, and whenever it's the first screen, you don't want the home button or the cancel button to be visible. So enabled parameter is doing that. Remember, we passed in is first screen and in is last screen, is first screen and is last screen in the lemon text and image with buttons composable. So I think you can recreate this function now yourself. Come on, just very vaguely tell me what composable does the function use. like what type of composables it uses. A text composable, an image composable wrapped around in a column, and it uses a row composable comprising of two buttons, right? Don't worry about it now, don't worry about your laptop now. You can try this after we finish with the session. All right, Santosh. The source code would be uploaded after the session. So please first understand as to how the URL elements are rendering on the screen first, so that you can recreate the code yourself. The objective of this session is not to like is not to just copy paste the code and be able to have the app working. No, it's the aim of this session is to understand how we are able to build our own composable functions and build our own UI. All right. Uh, Thanks, Aditya. Thanks. Yes, as far as beginners are concerned, I'm trying my best. But please do watch the videos that we have for Kotlin fundamentals and for the previous sessions in which we covered the basic composables such as the text, image, and the row and column composables, so that you can get a good hold of this session. However, just for a basic understanding, so that you guys don't feel left out, text composable is nothing but which displays text on the screen. Image composable similarly displays the image on the screen. So you might not remember the syntax right now, but when you will try to build your own apps and get used to writing the same code over and over and again, you'll surely remember the syntax. So the remembering the syntax is not an issue. All right. Can you use PX? Um, you can use any modifier, but if you want to scale your pixels through to the screen, I recommend using SP, because SP stands for scale pixels and it would scale your pixels according to the screen. However, you can use PX as well. All right, this is a very basic app. Please don't get into the technicalities and understand more of the logic part, because we haven't reached navigation yet. So I think we're taking more time with the composables. So let's move on to the navigation. Do we need App Studio app for making? There are different ways to make Android apps. You can use VS Code for that matter too, but I'd recommend Android Studio. It's easy to use, and you'd find multiple tutorials on YouTube as well. All right. All right. So now that we are clear with our screen as to what will display on our screen, let's let's move on and start developing the navigation for our app. All right. Just give me a minute. So remember we talked about roots in our app, right? So what we need to do first is we need to define our roots, or the IDs that will represent our screens in the app. So one way to do that is you can use an enum class. You must be aware of Kotlin fundamentals, and so you must be aware of classes and enumerations, right? So you can use an enum class, navigation screens, you can name it anything for that matter, which represents all the screens of your app. So for this case, it is screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, and screen 4. You can use string IDs because our roots take in string IDs, right? So enum class has a property called dot name. So navigation screens dot screen one dot name, which gives you a string, right? You can hard code the string IDs here as well, but we are using the property because we to make the code more readable. That navigation screens, which means that our screens would be possible from screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, screen 4. Uh,
So our screens would have only 4 values: screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, and screen 4. So these are nothing but roots. We have defined the roots of our app. So like remember the TV and the remote analogy where the cable channel number represented a root. Here screen 1 is the root, screen 2 is the root, screen 3 is the root, and screen 4 is the root. However, this is not a string. Enum class, enumeration class provides a property dot name which can convert this enumeration value to a string. So we'll use that. So first we learned that root should be a string, and second we learned that screen1.name or enum class.name would give us the required string or required root string. So this is what we have defined our roots of the screens. All right. So now we want the navigation app bar. Okay, will not be concerned about the top bar as right now. We'll just move on to the navigation. So the second step we want to do after defining the routes is have a variable that gives us the reference of of the nav controller or the TV remote. Like in the analogy which I gave you, the nav controller, or we want the reference to the nav controller to navigate to different screens using different routes. Cool. So we get a reference of the nav controller by writing this simple piece of code, val nav controller, which is equal to remember nav controller. So the remember nav controller function gives us the reference of the nav controller in the app. Now, and because we have added the gradle dependencies, we won't get any error here. Okay? It is the inbuilt function in the navigation dependency. So that being done, you might not be aware about this. You might not be aware of about the scaffold composable, but the scaffold composable for now, just remember it is used to represent the top bar, which we'll later code up. As you can see in my emulator screen, where it shows navigation app example and the purple top bar right there. So the scaffold is used to display a top bar in our screen. So we'll code it later, but for now, just understand that the scaffold is responsible for the top bar. All right. So the two steps that we have covered are the first we have defined the routes, and second we have gotten the reference of a nav controller. All right. Now the third thing we want to do is have the nav host or the container which shows different screens in the app, like the TV screen. So if I am taking the analogy along with me, the TV screens and the nav host. Now the nav host fragment, the nav host composable takes in nav controller as the argument or its remote or and the start destination, because without the start destination you won't be able to tell the nav host where to start showing the screen from, right? Which screen to show first. You won't be able to tell that. So the nav host takes in the nav controller and the start destination as its arguments along with the modifier, and you can have modifier as a default value, or you can add anything to the modifier however you want to modify your nav host, and however you want to show it on the screen, you can do it by the modifier. So that is this thing. So we are passing we are passing padding, modifier dot padding, and we are giving it the inner padding which is also concerned to the scaffold composable. But now just don't focus on the scaffold composable, instead focus on the nav host which takes in the nav controller and the start destination. All right. So now we have three things. We have roots, we have the nav controller reference. So we have we have the roots, we have the nav controller reference, and we have the nav host composable setup with the nav controller and the start destination passed. For now, we have passed the start destination to screen 1 because I want my app to start from screen 1. You can start from any screen. You can start it from screen 2, whatever your app wants to start from. You can do it by that. So what you pass navigation screens dot screen1 dot name, since root is a string, and I told you that enum class dot name gives you a string. Navigation screens is an enum class, and dot screen1 dot name would give you the desired string of the route which you want to show first. Great. So nav controller and start. So we have routes, we have nav controller, and we have nav host. Now what this nav host takes as a trailing lambda. Now if you're not familiar with lambdas, lambdas are functions that you write on the spot, and functions are first class constructs in Kotlin. right? So you can use them or pass them as variables to other functions. That is a basic concept and a very fundamental concept of Kotlin, that you can treat that functions are first class constructs. So you can treat them as variables. So nav host fragment, sorry, I keep saying fragment because earlier we used to have fragment, but my bad. But nav host composable, it it takes in a function which is nothing but the nav graph builder. So we write the function using a trailing lambda syntax. So you must be aware of the trailing lambda syntax, that if the last argument in any function is a function, you can just skip the argument in the parenthesis and declare it later on using curly brackets. That is a trailing lambda syntax. So the nav host fragment has a nav graph builder. Now we talked about nav graph, which shows the graphical representation of how a screens would move from one screen to the other. So nav graph is the graphical representation. And if you have done earlier Android development, you would have seen that XML file. You must have visualized that XML file. So I made a diagram, right? Let me show. Or you might remember that we had different screens like this, and that was a graph between those screens. Right? So we are building the same graph here using code only. So what we need to do while building that graph is we need to write composable functions. Like the name of the function is composable, and we need to pass in the root. So you can visualize this as an if else block. Like if root is equal to the first screen, then show me the first screen. If root is equal to the second screen, then show me the second screen. If root is equal to the third screen, then show me the third screen. And if root is equal to the fourth screen, then show me the fourth screen. So you can very well visualize this using a when clause or a if else clause. But to do this logic here in the nav host, you need to write composable, the keyword composable, and pass in the specific root. And what will happen when the nav controller gets that root as a parameter, right? So composable with root. So if I encounter the first root in the nav controller, if I encounter the first root, then what should I do? I should take a lemon text and image with buttons composable, and pass in the first screen whatever I want to display on the first screen. Like I want to display the lemon select string and the lemon tree string along with the first screen as true and the last screen as false, and the content description as lemon tree. So whatever I want to display on the first screen, I would be able to do with the help of this composable, and this keyword composable passed along with the first root as the argument. Similarly, for the second root as the argument, and the third root as the argument, and the fourth root as the argument. So do you remember that in the fourth root you would set is last screen to true, because that is the last screen, and otherwise in every other case except you would set the is last screen to false. So that is done. Now we didn't talk about the on next button clicked and the on cancel button clicked. We talked about them as parameters to this composable. However, we are defining what to do when this button is clicked, when the next button is clicked, and when the cancel button is clicked in respective screens. So now we want the nav controller, whenever the next button is clicked, we want the nav controller to navigate to the next screen. Right. So continuing with the same analogy of the remote, whenever the remote is fed with the same button, it changes to that channel. Right. If you're on channel 12 and you want to switch to channel 25, right? So you'll give the remote 25, you'll type in 25, and you will switch to the 25th channel. Similarly, so when the next button is clicked, we want the nav controller to navigate to the next screen. So for the first screen, I am navigating to the second screen using nav controller.navigate. See, you might not be able to remember, but nav controller.navigate would help you navigate from screen to screen. So this is the function that we use to navigate from between different screens. So similarly for the second screen, we want the next button to navigate to the third screen. So we use nav controller.navigate, and we pass in the third screen as the root argument, so that we get the third screen displayed. And similarly for the fourth screen, we don't want anything to happen since we have disabled the navigation next button on the third screen, on the fourth screen, sorry, on the fourth screen. So we won't pass in any any action to the next button, but we'll pass an action to the cancel button to navigate us back to the home screen. So how do we navigate back to the home screen? So let's take the second screen as an example. Whenever the cancel button is clicked on the second screen, we'll pop up the backstack. Now, a backstack is a new term that is coming right now because I did not explain it earlier. So I'll explain it right now. So let's move on to the notes part. Just give me a minute. Backstack. Backstack is an important concept. Um, just a minute. All right. Cool. So the backstack. We have to talk about the backstack. So backstack. So So the backstack stores whatever screens show up on your nav host in the same order they show up in the nav host fragment. So if the first screen shows up in your uh, nav host, so the backstack is can be perfectly visualized with the stack only. So the first screen would be right here, first screen, and then if you go to the second screen, then the second screen would be visible. So it keeps a log of whatever screen you visit. So the third screen, and so on. So if I want to return to the home screen, you can guess, right, what needs to be done. I want to pop everything from the backstack. So I want to pop this out, I want to pop this out, and I want to reach this screen, the first screen. So to reach the home screen, I'm popping everything from the backstack till I reach my start screen. That is what is being done by the pop-up backstack function, where I pop up everything from the backstack except the first screen. All right, so I think backstack must be clear to you by now. All right, let's move back. So here in the in our app, when our cancel button is clicked, we are popping up backstack to our first screen, everything to our first screen. We are popping everything out till our first screen, and to do that, we call the nav controller.pop backstack function and pass it the route till we want our backstack to be popped out. And we pass in the other parameter inclusive equal to false, which is self-explanatory, wherein if you pass in inclusive equal to true, then that screen would also get popped out. Otherwise, if you pass inclusive as false, that screen, whichever you want to pop till, that screen would be left and the other screens would be popped out from the navigation backstack. Right. So we have understood the nav graph, building of the nav graph. We have understood routes. We have understood nav controller and the navigation on the nav host composable, and we have understood how to navigate to different routes of the app using the nav controller.navigate function, and we have also understood how to pop our backstack so that we can navigate back to the home screen using the nav controller.pop backstack navigate screen, whatever your home screen's name is, function. Right. So I think this is clear. Any doubts till now? Go ahead, Himanshu. Go ahead. Backstack, all right. Anyone else who wants to have any other topic, or we want backstack, the explanation of backstack again? Just list in all the topics you want explanation of again, so that I can go through them one by one. I'm asking for doubts about the current session. So, alright, since we didn't get any more answers, we'll understand backstack again. So, backstack is nothing. Like, just a minute, I'll show my OneNote screen. All right. So backstack is nothing which is a stack which would log all your screens whenever you navigate to them. All right. I forgot to turn my camera off. Just a minute. No, it's a last in first out principle again. All right. Yeah. Wait. I'll explain it. I'll explain it. So whatever destination you navigate to in your app, that would be stored in the backstack in the stack format. So let me just make a new screen. Consider this as a stack. Now, if I navigate to the first screen, my first screen would be stored in the stack first screen. Then I choose to navigate to the second screen. So my second screen would be shown on the app, would be pushed to the backstack. Then I navigate to the third screen. So the third screen would be pushed to the backstack. So backstack is keeping track of all the screens that have been visited till now. And if I decide to visit the first screen again, then I'll I'll again have my first screen in the backstack. So this is the backstack is helpful for us to implement the back button functionality. So whenever we press the back button in our device, you can try it with any app, or you can I will show you in this app as well, that if you press the back button, this the topmost thing the topmost entry in the backstack gets popped out. So our nav controller, or the nav host, the nav controller and the nav host knows that we are at the third screen now. Right. So now if we press the back button, we would be navigated back to the second screen. So this is the last in the first out principle, where you store all the screens you have visited in your app in a stack format. This is done through the back stack. And when you want to navigate back, you pop out from the back stack. So whenever you pop out, you can navigate back. So this stack is nothing but which stores screens, the order of the screens in which we visit them. So that is the backstack, if I'm making sense right now. Is the backstack clear? Whose doubt it was? Crazy and timer. Is the backstack clear? All right, good. All right, so moving ahead, now we understand how navigation works in our app, right? We have understood routes, we have understood the nav controller. I'm iterating this again and again so that you get familiar with the names, and once you get to code it yourself, you don't feel very unfamiliar, or you don't feel that okay, I don't know this term, right? So that is why I'm iterating the terms. The routes, the destinations, the nav controller, the nav host, the nav graph. This is all what we have covered till now. And the backstack as well. We have covered what backstack is. and what functionality does it help us to does it help us in, and further how do we pop something out from the back stack, and how do we navigate back to the home screen. So this is all what we have covered, right? And now I think with your basic knowledge, you would be able to implement this in your app, right? Just follow everything stepwise. Like first define the routes, then have the nav controller reference, then set up the nav host, then build up the nav graph, then 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 in the nav graph define which screen would lead to which screen depending upon a certain route, and then implement this to your composable function wherever whichever displays your screen, whichever composable function displays your screen, just pass in the actions you want to the composable function to navigate to different screens. Now you might ask, and this is a very popular question that you might ask, that why don't we pass the nav controller itself to the composable function, right? We can, why are we passing it the actions and then we are assigning the actions to the buttons as and when required? But can we not just simply pass the nav controller to our composable function and then navigate to different screens? Yes, that is a way to do it. That would definitely work. But this concept you will be more familiar once you progress in Android development. That is application architecture. So we want our data to flow in a unidirectional format. So if we pass the nav controller to our composable function and make our composable functions dependent on the nav controller, then we are defeating the purpose of dividing our program into modules. We want our navigation logic in one place so that if it falters anyhow in any place, we can correct it at the same place. We don't want our navigation logic to flow to different composables, and we want that our data should flow in only one direction. So that is why we are not passing the nav controller to our composable function. Instead, we are having the navigation logic in one place, and we are passing the actions to the composable functions so that the buttons, when buttons will get clicked, we execute those actions. All right. Um, I think, but for now, yeah, data flow and unidirectional data flow format is something that you will pick up in later stages. I request you to go through all the pathways provided in the Android Basics in Compose course, so that you can get familiar with all the concepts. There you can extend your knowledge of navigation. You can also refer to the navigation component documentation, where you will find the complete documentation and everything about the navigation component, even including how you pass different arguments to when you different values when you're navigating from one screen to the other. Sometimes you need some value from one screen to the other. So you'll remember, if you read the documentation, you will learn how to do that. And the navigation component is vast. All right. So we have only covered a very small part of the navigation component through our code, just to give you a kickstart on the navigation component. And it is your responsibility to explore more on the navigation component if you want to get really familiar with the navigation component. Right? So that is something I expect of you guys. And I expect you guys to recreate this code on your own using the logic. Just remember a text and image along with two buttons, and two buttons, next and cancel. The cancel button would help us to navigate back to the home screen, and the next button would be navigating us to the next screen using the navigation component that we learned today. Uh, is someone from the management there? Could you please provide them with the attendance form?
All right, the attendance form is coming, guys. Just be patient for it. You can Tapas. You can learn about it more from the Android documentation. Just Google in navigation component with Compose. You'd get the entire documentation. And further, you can also visit the Android Basics in Compose course provided by Google and complete their badges. So I think you know how to find those links. But if you have any query regarding those links, I would share them to you. Should I share those links in the chat box, guys? All right, so I have got a message from the management that the session is almost over. So anyone asking for the attendance right now won't get the attendance. It was open 30 minutes ago, so you should have filled the form by then. People are requesting for the attendance and okay, the form is open for 5 minutes. All of those who want to fill in their attendance can please do so. The link is provided in the chat box itself. Thanks a lot, Santosh. Please refrain from asking questions not related to the session, please. We are running short of time. We'll have the next session probably next week, but we'll inform you about that. So, guys, let's wind up. So thank you all for being patient with me. I hope you liked the session. I hope you were able to understand how the navigation component works and how, again, I'd reiterate the terms, but you won't like it as well. But all right. But I just want you to know that I think that you can now recreate the app using the basic layout and a basic navigation graph. So that you can do. Can I expect you guys to recreate the app and send it to me or upload it on your GitHub so that I get that you know to do stuff, you know to add navigation to your app. Today's task about or the homework is that you recreate this app, what I showed you today. You recreate this app yourself. That is your homework. And I really expect you to do that very sincerely because only then you would be able to understand how everything that I have taught you in the session, like how everything pans out. So only then you would be able to understand. So please like, share, and subscribe, guys, to the channel for more interesting videos. We definitely want to see you in the next session, and we'll cover another interesting topic in the next session. So till then, stay tuned, and bye, guys. I hope you had a great time today.